Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. I'm Jack Flintham and I'm joined today by Steven Railston. Steve, good week?
Yeah, not bad. The press conference was yesterday, so obviously we're recording this on a Friday, and it's always nice when the press conferences are on a Thursday. Just Fridays just feel a bit more simple. Record the podcast, file a few articles, finish at 4 p.m, head to the gym, and it'll be quiet at night tonight because it's an early train down to London, 6:30 train, unfortunately. So it is a very early start, but look, I can be professional occasionally. means there'll be no beer tonight. I'll be in bed early.
Yes, you've got 20 minutes extra lay-in than me. I think mine's at 6:09. So yeah, it's going to be a very early one tomorrow, but should be a good one. And we'll discuss the Tottenham game this weekend after the break. We'll kick things off though with the United news this week, and I suppose the big one has been Jason Wilcox. He's been speaking to Manchester United mainly about transfers this week. What did you make of that interview, Steve?
Well, I think he first spoke to Mark Sullivan and he walked along the pitch and did a kind of an informal chat. It was quite a decent interview at Carrington, and I was told actually that they were interrupted by the sprinkler coming in and making them and soaking them, basically getting them a bit drenched. So they had to cut that bit out or do the take again. And then Jason Wilcox has spoken again on a podcast later in the week with Helen Evans and spoke about transfers and really explained the structure. And it's really good to hear someone from the club go on record and speak about how the club runs, how the club profile signings, how they plan in the summer transfer window. Obviously, Jason Wilcox joined initially as technical director last year in 2024, and he was promoted to director of football in June. He was basically doing that role for a lot longer, but he was the de facto director of football really before his official appointment. But now he's got the official title. Omar Brada is obviously the CEO, so there's a chain of command there. Christopher Vivell as well is obviously heavily involved. He was, I think it was February, promoted to director of recruitment. He was there on an interim basis, having had spells at Chelsea and with the Red Bull system as well. So capable people in the football club, and it was interesting to hear them really, Wilcox get into the strategy, as you said. And I think I'll get a quote up here. I pulled it up before the podcast. If anyone hasn't listened to it, it's definitely worth going and checking out. But Jason Wilcox has said, look, there's continuous meetings with myself and Ruben, with Chris Favell and his team underneath, where we're very clear on the profiles that we need. So the brief will come from myself and Ruben. It goes into Chris. There's a lot of debate and discussion around the profiles that we need. And then the scouts will go into the market. We'll combine that with the data team. And then there will just be constant dialogue. And there's obviously a bit more on that. So like I say, if you haven't actually listened to the podcast, it's probably worth listening to it. One thing I will say, it's refreshing. It's so refreshing kind of hearing Jason Wilcox speak and on a club podcast and explaining this, but it's much easier to speak when there's been a decent run of games. There's probably been a reason we haven't heard from quite a long time. He obviously spoke at Old Trafford for an event for former players, and those quotes are actually really interesting because I think that was privately recorded. I don't think the club were aware that someone was there with a camera and putting it on YouTube. And he actually said during that conversation that, look, I pray we get the chance to get this club where it needs to be, which suggested there was perhaps a little bit of uncertainty even around his position. He's obviously very trusted by Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He's been empowered. He's been given a lot of responsibility. But from what I hear, from what I've been told, from talking to people over the last 18 months, they do think a lot of Wilcox, and he is supposed to be a very good operator. He comes across as a very intelligent operator as well. I think there was probably eyebrows slightly raised when he first came into the club. People think back to his playing career and wonder whether he has the credentials for such a role, but he was obviously at Manchester City, did very well there, and joined from Southampton, was placed on a small period of gardening leave before joining United. So he did have the credentials. The one thing I would be concerned about would be the Cityfication of United, or however we want to brand it. There's been a lot of former Manchester City staff members that are coming into the club, and I think Nicky Butt and Paul Scholes were asked about it recently. They've launched another podcast. I actually spoke to them last year ahead of the podcast with the BBC, but I think they're doing something separate now with Paddy McGuinness, and they were asked about former City staff members coming in, and there's a lot of them now, and it is interesting because if you're a former United player like Butt and Scholes, you're definitely going to question that. And it's Jason Wilcox, Director of Football, Omar Barada, CEO, Stephen Torpey, who's now head of the academy, who's joined from Brentford. Alan Wright, I broke that story myself. He's now coaching in the PDP group, which is the under-21s, and Sam Erif, who's the performance director. So there's 5 people there who worked at Manchester City who are now working at United. There's been some murmurs of some other staff, put to myself, potentially joining as well from City. So that'll be interesting to see if that develops. But is that a good thing? These members of staff have clearly got the credentials, and at the end of the day, Manchester City have done incredibly well. That's obviously been funded heavily with a lot of money, but they have been the best in class in a lot of ways. Sir Jim Ratcliffe discussed that gap when he first invested into the club, and perhaps he's trying to almost copy their template and by bringing those staff members in, because there's been a few examples of that now across the last year or so.
Yeah, and it's interesting you should say about the sort of Cityfication of the club. What, do you think that's necessarily something that fans are going to be up in arms about? I mean, it feels like it's a stick to be United with when they're not doing well. But I suppose when they are, and as we've seen in recent weeks, they have been doing quite well. It's kind of one of those things where it's kind of pushed to one side and it's a non-factor. Do you think that's the case?
Yeah, football fans will not care if United are winning games. That's the bottom line. You're completely right. Results dictate the narrative. Of course they do. But United have got to get results. They've obviously had a very good October, and there's been the positivity has just been remarkable considering the first few weeks of the season, pardon me, which were really disappointing. Ruben Amorim was under huge pressure, and then obviously undefeated now in 4, going into the Tottenham game with huge hopes of getting another win, and then potentially going to November international break, and everything is different when you compare that to the September international break. It's amazing what a few weeks in football can do. But you're completely right. If United are winning games, that will not be a story in it. Look, I don't think it's a stick to beat them with. I just think it's probably an interesting talking point, because it's probably something that goes under the radar. If you're an everyday fan, you're going around your business, you might tune into this podcast while you're going for a walking the dog. You might not be tuned into United news as much as we are, because that's our jobs to cover all aspects of the club. So yeah, it's caught my attention, but again, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a stick to beat them with, but slightly interesting nonetheless. Yeah,
and just before we move on from Wilcox, what would you say how he ranks with the signings that they've brought in? It feels like at the moment it's been quite a good summer this time round. I believe he actually mentioned that this past transfer window was a lot better than the one previous. I was just interested to hear where you think he sort of ranks.
Well, he will be judged on signings. We're talking about results, which is obviously the most tangible each week when you see it on the pitch. But those players who you sign are key to securing those results. As I say, he was technical director in 2024, but he was essentially the de facto director of football. He was hands-on across recruitment, heavily involved. If you look back at that transfer window, Joshua Zirkzee, Leny Yoro, Matthias de Ligt, Nossi Mazraoui, Man Utd, and then some youth signings as well. On that list, Zirkzee and Utd would be put in the disappointing category at the moment, I believe. In my opinion, Leny Yoro, great signing. De Ligt, fantastic this season. Obviously a bit of a mixed bag in his first campaign, but United collectively struggled. And Mazraoui as well, a real utility man. It was a bargain fee, around £12 million. So for a player of that quality who can he's played in 6 different positions for the club, you can't complain at that transfer fee. It's rare to get such a bargain in the current market, which is obviously inflated. I think Yoro was decent value for money. I think that could look very good. in the next few years, obviously north of £60 million, excluding add-ons, but he could become a potentially £100 million player. He's still only 19 years old, which is remarkable when you think about kind of the quality that he's shown, the potential that he's shown. He's got a very high ceiling, and we've still not seen the best of Leny Yoro. There's a lot more to come, which is exciting. The Lit's 26. He's started to really put in consistent performances this season. So as I say, I think those 3 signings are good signings. Xerxes this season is hardly played. He's not even started, of course. Just trying to look at how many minutes he's played. And he's only played 90 minutes across 5 games.
Yeah, I was just about to say
it's incredible, really. I mean, in obviously played in the number 10 role last season, and he's just not going to play there this time around, because you've got Mason Mount, Matthias Cunha, Brian Mbeumo. You've got a lot of talent there now that's ahead of Xerxes. Can he play down the middle? I don't think so myself. And perhaps in a cup game, but United were knocked out of the Carabao Cup in the second round. They don't have European football. And then you got £42 million, excluding add-ons. 3 starts this season, 330 minutes across 9 games. Both of those players would have to be placed in the disappointing category. And then if you move on to just this summer gone, I think it looks a whole lot better. I think, and I said at the time, I copped a bit of flack on Twitter because I said I actually thought it was an impressive window. And I think a lot of fans latched on to the fact that they didn't sign a midfielder. And of course, that had potential to be a big concern that they didn't land a new midfield signing and freshen up that area. But Matthias Cunha, Premier League proven from Wolves. Brian Mbeumo, again, Premier League proven from Brentford. And then you had Benjamin Sesko and Salah Lamans come into the football club, who have different profiles. They are obviously unproven, but they have very high ceilings. And the payoff with those 2 players could be huge in time. We've already seen it with Lamans, and that's why his impact's been so impressive, because whenever a young player comes into the club, they should be given time to adapt to their new surroundings. But Lamans has hit the ground running, made a huge impact at 23. Sesko's 22, is gradually finding his feet. He scored 2 goals, obviously his first against Brentford, followed up against Sunderland. Ruben Amorim, I can't say what he said in the second part of the press conference, of course, because that's embargoed tonight, but he touched upon Sesko in that section, so it's really worth in those quotes later on. And Sesko just needs a little bit more time. I believe he will pay off as well. His movement's been good. His finishing probably needs a little bit of work, as you'd expect of a player that age. But I think he's already shown way better technical ability than Rasmus Højlund. As I said, after the Brighton game, when he made that Cruyff turn, that was a real quality moment from Sesko. So he's got the ability and the potential to become a 20-goal a season striker. He just needs a little bit of time. And I know we can sit here and say, well, United don't have time. They needed an experienced striker in the summer transfer window, and that's all well and good, but they didn't sign one. They signed Sesko, so they've got to play with the cards that they've got in front of them now. So I think the transfer business in the summer just gone, very good. Obviously, Diego Leon came in as well. But you look back to 2024, and it's probably a bit more of a mixed bag with Ugarte and Xerxes. There's big question marks around those 2 players.
Yeah, you touched on him there, and he's also spoken this week to the media. It's Leny Yoro. Just take us through, as you take a sip, just take us through that, what he's had to say this week.
Yeah, so fair play to United, because they've been really good with the access this season. It obviously helps when the results are better and there's a bit more positivity. You naturally make players more available. I spoke to Patrick Dorgan myself in August with 2 colleagues, and there was an opportunity to speak to Harry Maguire as well, which a few other members of the pack took advantage of down at a school in Stretford, I believe. Bruno Fernandes then spoke a fortnight ago ahead of his 300th appearance. So it was fantastic to sit down with Fernandes, who is famous for being the best talker. And then Leny Yoro spoke to a few this week. So fantastic access. It's great to hear from these players, to have an opportunity to sit down with them for 20 minutes, for half an hour, however long it is. You get some really good quotes, you get some really good insight, and it's really valuable. And I thought one of the interesting quotes from Yoro's sit down was talking about having the right characters in the dressing room, because in the summer, Ruben Amorim obviously made the decision to banish the bad eggs. Alejandro Garnacho, Marcus Rashford, and I should say perceived bad eggs from Amorim's standpoint. And I remember when I spoke to someone at the start of August at the club, and they said, we see it every summer, that the mood is good and the mood is incredibly positive. But this summer, they generally meant it. They really believed that it felt different in pre-season out in the States, the mood and the vibe. And that, they said, had a lot to do with the decision to move on certain players out of the football club, certain players who have big profiles, and it was a big decision to move them out of the club. And it almost created us and them kind of mentality in the dressing room in the summer ahead of the new season. So Yoro discussed the need to have good personalities. And I'm just reading it. Yeah, he said, we cannot build something with bad energy or bad atmosphere or bad characters. I think the club is doing well with this. He said, we don't need any drama. So it's interesting when you hear that. And Luke Shaw reiterated that point. He kind of said something similar a few weeks back as well, I remember. So there clearly is something in it. And I think the morale in the dressing room has improved as a result. The vibe is better, the mood is better, the players are getting along, and that helps naturally on a match day, especially if you're all friends and you're all pulling in the right direction. Of course, you're not going to get along with everyone in the dressing room, but if you're doing the right things, you're behaving in the right way, it's going to help a lot on a weekend, on a match day. So really interesting to hear that from Yoro. And I think obviously he's made a very good start at the club. There was a few injuries last season. He had a metatarsal injury when he first came in, which delayed his competitive debut. That was in pre-season. But what he has shown is huge potential. And he's looked very comfortable on the right side of that back three. He looked very good on the left side of the back three last season in the spring when he was asked to play there. And he was asked about as well Ruben Amram's tendency to bring off the centre-backs in the closing stages of games. And he said, we've spoken to Amram about it. He's explained, he said, look, I can't explain to you the specific reasons. But that was interesting as well. So there's clearly good communication going on there. I think the defensive options are quite strong at the moment when you look at them, especially with Lissandro Martinez coming back. He could be in the squad again this weekend. He could return to the squad this weekend. He's been recovering from a knee injury. He was absent against Nottingham Forest, but you've got obviously Martinez, Yoro, Harry Maguire, Luke Shaw, Delay, Aidan Heaven there as well. So there's some real good options in the back line, and with Senna Lomans as well behind them. It's starting to look like a very good defensive foundation.
Definitely. And just before we take a break, there's obviously looking at some of the youngsters, and it was good to see Kone back in amongst the gym, but slightly worse news for Toby Collier out at West Brom. Yeah,
so I was down at Tamworth in August. It was a lovely night driving down to Tamworth, but around a 2-hour drive to go watch the under-21s in the National League Cup. And the game was abandoned, unfortunately, just before half-time because Kone went down with quite a nasty head injury, and his body almost looked a jolt really when he collided with the player, and it was quite a heavy knock. It looked pretty nasty. He was stretchered off, and the game was abandoned because there was no replacement ambulance, basically. So obviously, with the cuts and the strain on the NHS, etc., they couldn't get a new ambulance to come in to facilitate the second half. So that's why the game was called off, and that'll be replayed in December. I was told a few weeks later that Kone was fine. He actually stayed in hospital overnight. He was discharged immediately the next morning, and he kind of recovered at home. So he's been on the mend, and they've had to kind of be very careful with him because of his eye socket, and he's not been in contact training, so he's been steadily brought along. But he made his return against Notts County on Tuesday night, coming on or Wednesday, I can't remember, coming on for the final few minutes of the match. So great to see him back. And it was really bad timing, that injury, because he was on the cusp of the first team. Obviously went to America for pre-season, didn't actually play a minute, but I think there was probably a feeling around the club that perhaps at the end of the season, Kone would maybe get a chance to make his first senior appearance, but then he's had this injury. Will that impact him? Of course it will. Does he now get back into the senior side, the senior setup, I should say, not the side? He'll probably spend the next few weeks and months around the 21s and try force his way back into the first team camp. So it'd be interesting to see how that develops. And you're right, obviously Toby Collier, who came into the first team last season, made his full Premier League debut. He came off the bench against Liverpool, replacing Casemiro. And since then, Collier's been loaned to West Brom. Casemiro's become very important again. But unfortunately for Collier, I think when you looked at that loan, you thought it was going to be a very good move from working with Ryan Mason, former Tottenham midfielder, who's in charge at West Brom. But West Brom are struggling. I think they're around 12th in the Championship. They're not having a very good time of things. Lost against Charlton on Tuesday night. Toby Collier was absent. from the squad with a muscle injury. He was on the bench for the first 7 games of the season. He came off the bench in each of those matches, finally broke into the side against Millwall, played the next game and then picked up a muscle injury. So just really bad timing for Collier, unfortunately. Hopefully it's nothing serious, and hopefully he can prove his quality, get back fit and get a run of games, because that's what he needs in the Championship.
Definitely, and we hope both youngsters push on from on here. So yeah, we'll take a break there, and afterwards we'll speak about the Spurs game this weekend. Right, welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, obviously, it's Tottenham tomorrow in the lunchtime kickoff for United. It's their first meeting since that night in Bilbao.
Did something happen in Bilbao?
Did something? No, no. I think the records have been wiped on that one. But obviously, Spurs looking at a lot different setup than they were that night. Obviously, Ange has gone. Thomas Frank has come in to replace him. How do you see this one?
Yeah, big Ange bit the bullet, didn't he? After the Europa League final. It's just who we are, mate. Just who we are. Disaster in Nottingham Forest. Didn't win a game, did he? Look, I think he could probably rock up at Celtic at some point. I think there's been links with Postecoglou to return up north of the border. Obviously, Thomas Frank came in at Tottenham from Brentford. I thought that was a shrewd appointment. Again, Premier League proven, someone that's done incredibly well in the top flight over the last few years. He deserves that bigger job. He's got that opportunity. But Tottenham this season, I don't think they've fared too well. I think the sixth in the league. Just can't have too much complaints, but they struggled against Chelsea. I saw bits of that game. Chelsea obviously won 1-0, and Tottenham didn't create much at all. I think it was 0.05 XG they created. And look, saying that, I'm going to get some criticism because some people listening will be he's trotting out expected goals, but it just shows how little they created that game, and they were absolutely toothless. So there's an opportunity for United here at the weekend. And in terms of what's different from the Europa League final, I mean, it was a rubbish game, wasn't it? It was incredibly scrappy. Tottenham edged it, which was incredibly disappointing, and meant United had no Europe this season. But you look at the team who started in Bilbao, and you'd probably say only 4 players are practically guaranteed starters this weekend. Bruno Fernandes, Casemiro, Luke Shaw, and Ahmad, I would say, will be on the team sheet. But the rest of the team, obviously, there's been changes. I think the signings in the summer were key because United obviously had to overhaul their attack, and they did. I've banged on about it now in the last few weeks after the good results that Brian Mbeumo, Matheus Cunha really have been transformational signings. United wouldn't have won against Brighton without that pair. They were excellent, and it's no surprise to see them performing as they are, because we all have seen them in the Premier League across the last few years star for Brentford and Wolves, and they're 2 wonderful football players, and they almost felt too good not to succeed. Sometimes when a United sign a player, you can see them being a flop. You look at Jadon Sancho and perhaps come from a foreign league like Sancho with Dortmund, and the circumstances are a bit different, but there was very low risk with Cunha and Mbeumo, and they've hit the ground running, which has been great to see. But also the decision to freshen up the top and bottom of the pitch has been huge. Rasmus Højlund started against Tottenham in Bilbao. Andre Onana started between the sticks. Again, we've covered this, but I felt it was harsh to get rid of Højlund in the summer. Obviously, an incredibly disappointing season, a huge regression from 16 goals in his first year for the club. But he wanted to stay, he wanted to fight for his place, and I think it would have been beneficial for him to stay and play as a backup striker. Ruben Amorim had seen enough. He's moved them on. Obviously, Sesko's come in. Andre Onana had to leave. I think it's fair to say, again, probably a little bit harsh in terms of he's better than Altay Bayindir for me. That might be controversial again because they both are extremely error prone. They make a lot of mistakes. But Onana was objectively a better goalkeeper than Bayindir for me. He's obviously been shipped out on loan to Turkey, which, again, he can have no complaints. He's ultimately paid the price for failing to cut out the errors in his game. And we've just seen the difference that Saint Lomans has made, really. And you look at striker, the position, and goalkeeper, and those 2 positions, if you get them right, football's not really that hard. If there's 2 really, really important positions, you get the spine of your team right, you make it a lot easier for yourselves at the weekend. And we've seen that across the last month with, obviously, Sesko has led the line quite well, some good link-up play. And as I said before, I think he'll come good with the fullness of time. I think he's got a lot of potential, but Senna Lomans as well has made a huge impact. We talk about the saves he's made, his presence in the box, but again, as I've said, the kind of confidence that he transmits to the back line. So I think the difference is the personnel, really. Ruben Amorim was asked that question in his pre-match press conference. Obviously, you can imagine there was a few bits on Tottenham because it's the first meeting since that game. And he said that the characteristics of the players. So I guess he kind of agreed without outright saying it's the personnel. But United needed to sign better players and it's ultimately helping.
Yeah, and do you think United enter this game sort of with, it's weird to say it, but slightly less pressure than Spurs? Obviously, we were at Nottingham when the Spurs-Chelsea game was on, but it was clear after that match that Thomas Frank came under a lot of pressure from the home fans. The boos rang out. It was described by some as one of the worst performances they'd seen from Spurs. Obviously, they've won in midweek against Copenhagen. But do you think it just feels like it could just turn again, especially if United rock up and pick up 3 points?
It was Mickey van der Ven, wasn't it, and Jed Spence who ignored Thomas Frank after the game. Pardon me, I've got something stuck in my throat. And if that had happened at United, could you imagine the headlines? They were looking like traitors, weren't they? Not faithfuls. I'm saying that joke, but it's a controversial opinion again. I think it's a load of rubbish, the traitors, Jack. I need to get it off my chest.
Wow.
Do you watch it, I presume?
Yes, I do. Yes.
I mean, I can make the joke because I imagine thousands of people watch that show. But I said to my girlfriend last night, I think it's the most overrated TV show ever. Yeah, but anyways, we'll not get into it. But yeah, it was questionable behaviour, wasn't it, from Van der Ven and Jed Spence to ignore Thomas Frank. He was asked about it at his next press conference before Copenhagen, and he kind of played it down and almost suggested it was the media trying to make a narrative of it and make it into a story. So I'm not sure everything is going too well for Thomas Frank at Tottenham. The signs are clearly not too good, and as I say, the lack of chances created against Chelsea would be concerning for Thomas Frank. I don't think they've been very good going forward. He's probably tightened it up at the back, but that has affected their attacking threat. Having said that, in the week they won 4-0 against Copenhagen with 10 men. I think they got a red card in the hour mark, so that will give them a bit of confidence heading into this game. In terms of pressure, I think it's probably too early to say Thomas Frank's under too much pressure. Look, you need to win games, but the 6 in the Premier League, aren't they? When you look at it from a United perspective, of course, Ruben Amorim's 3 wins and then a draw. Obviously, the draw was a bit disappointing, but October has brought him a lot of time, a lot of faith. The conversation around his system has been silenced. The conversation around his future has been silenced because of that run. So yeah, Amorim's got a lot less pressure on his shoulders now, and you could perhaps see it building gradually on Thomas Frank if they continue to struggle going forward. But it'll be interesting to see how this game develops at the weekend, because they are very different sides than the 2 sides we watched in Bilbao at the end of May.
Definitely, and I think it possibly says a lot about United's comeback this season, that should they win, and either should Spurs win, both teams are level on points. By the time the 3 p.m. kickoffs begin, United could be will be second in the Premier League table. And I mean, even if it is just for a few hours, that'll be a huge confidence boost, won't it?
Yeah, and they could have been obviously second last weekend, against Nottingham Forest, which is why that was so disappointing. And as we said on the podcast, the review podcast, Ruben Amorim said it was points dropped, despite the spirited comeback to salvage a point at the end, with Ahmad scoring the goal. It's a big opportunity, and when you're playing well, you have a lot of confidence. The spirit in the team is improved and a lot better. And you can just feel it when you speak to Ruben Amorim. Although, to be fair to him, he's remained upbeat even during the most difficult moments. He's been fantastic value even during that tough period. But as I said the other week when he came in for his press conference, I think he tapped Jamie Jackson on the shoulder and he came in with a big smile on his face. And even footage of Ruben Amorim outside Carrington when he's taking photos with fans, and there's a glow almost about his aura now, his demeanour. which is great to see. He looks to have benefited from those wins. So yeah, look, Tottenham are 6th. I think United 8th in the table. Yes, 8th. Just like on 17 points. But Ruben Amorim made the point, and this is a very good point. When you look at the top of the Premier League table and the bottom, there's not much separating the teams at all, really. It is incredibly tight. And I almost can't tell whether the league is incredibly competitive or just incredibly pretty bad at the moment. It's hard to determine which is true. Arsenal are obviously setting the pace, top of the league, with a fantastic defensive foundation. They just don't seem to concede goals at the moment. City probably look the second best, which the table will tell you that. And then Liverpool, who have looked very, very wobbly, and some serious question marks around Arne Slot at the moment after winning the Premier League. So United have got a huge opportunity to get back into the Champions League. Europe was the target at the start of the season. It has to be the Champions League for me. Europa League, it's all right, but you want to be in the Champions League to sign better players, to get more broadcast revenue. It's where Manchester United should be. It's what they've got to be aiming for, and it's very attainable this season, especially if there's 5 Champions League places again, which I think there will be. United should really be pushing towards qualifying for that competition.
Yeah, and just before I let you go, Steve, I'm going to put you on the spot again for a score prediction. How do you see this one playing out?
10-0, I think.
Nice. Yeah. I'm off to the bookies.
Yeah, I don't know. It's United will be confident. I think if they perform how they did against Brighton, against Liverpool, against Sunderland, they'll obviously give themselves a way better chance of winning this match. I think the energy levels were lacking from the start against Nottingham Forest. I think, and Amorim said that himself, you could feel it. It just didn't seem at their absolute peak level. Fair play, they got the goal anyways. They've got to stay concentrated because they threw that game away almost at the start of the second half, and that's obviously what cost them at the City ground. And United's record on the road hasn't been too great. So Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, they've got to really start well and start with the energy and go about the business like they would at home. It's obviously harder to do that because Old Trafford gives you a lot of energy, especially under the floodlights. Those matches, I think it's quite an underrated point. Those games, you can really, it's a real different energy in the stadium, and it helps them get going. So they've got to do that. It's a 12:30 game. It's an early kickoff. But there can be no excuses, and they've got to go into the November international break, hopefully on a high. Move up to 20 points, which they move up to 20 points, 11 games played, November international break. You can see it's been a good start to the season. And that looked very unlikely after defeats to Grimsby Town and Manchester City. So it'll be an impressive turnaround for them. I've waffled on there because you asked for a score prediction, so I'll go with 2-1. I could see United conceding, but I think they might win the game.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much once again, Steve, for your time. Obviously, we'll be at Tottenham tomorrow. We'll be bringing you all of the build-up, analysis, post-match reaction, updates, all the good stuff over the weekend. And we'll be back on Monday to dissect it all. So until then, take care and goodbye.